few years ago, a trauma surgeon from Burlington, Vermont, designed a chair that allows people to sit actively, and that means moving around while you're sitting. And this chair looks kind of like a stool, except the top wobbles. And the beauty of this chair is that it sort of forces you to keep moving in order to sit on it, because otherwise you would sort of fall back. There's no backrest, and you can't rest your shoulders with an elbow rest or any of that other stuff. And this chair, to my way of thinking, is so brilliant because I've always told people the only good part of your chair is the first 3 inches. Sit there, don't use the backrest, don't rest your elbows, don't rest your neck. Sit nice and tall using your own skeleton and muscles and work from there and get the best chair you can and then spend as little time as you can sitting in it. So that has been my advice. And I was so lonely for years because everybody else was talking about how you need lumbar support and elbow rests and foot rests and all these other accoutrement that I felt were really damaging. Finally, I meet Dr. Turner Osler, and for once, a doctor agrees with me. And it was such a pleasure to finally talk about sitting tall, good posture, getting up out of your chair. But I think we need a little background. And to give us that, I'd like to turn this over to Dr. Osler. Welcome back to the show, Dr. Osler.
Hey, Deborah, it's good to be with you again.
Yes. So tell us the scope of this industry, how big it is, and how much sway it has.
Well, in the United States, everybody sits and they sit a lot, on average 8 hours a day. And a lot of that sitting goes on in offices around the country. And so there's an immense business to be had selling office chairs to people who sit in offices all day long. And so chair companies have evolved to give people chairs to sit on. And some of these companies are immense. Steelcase is a company that does over $4 billion with a B worth of business every year. They pay their CEO $7 million a year. And they make a lot of chairs. Steelcase is the biggest of the breed, but there are just a handful of other ones. Knoll and Herman Miller come to mind immediately. Knoll was just bought by Herman Miller, actually. So there's, these immense companies are buying up other companies that are almost equally immense. And so there's a huge amount of power that's been concentrated in the sitting industrial complex, you might almost say.
And you say in one of these email exchanges you're talking about big chair as in big pharma. It's sort of the equivalent statement. And you say that these chairs are actually harmful to our posture and our health, leading us to earlier death. Is big chair aware that sitting is taking years off people's lives and damaging?
In order for them to be unaware, they would have to be living under a rock, right? I mean, I think pretty much everybody has heard that sitting is the new smoking. And I'm sure that big chair doesn't want that to be repeated any more often than is absolutely necessary. But I kind of hit on the idea of big chair because it's an exact parallel to what was going on 70 years ago, and at the time was called big tobacco. Tobacco companies were making a lot of money by selling cigarettes. And, some doctors were kind of looking around and saying, wait a minute, people are dying of lung cancer and emphysema and having heart attacks and having amputations. It seems like this tobacco stuff is really bad for people. And the tobacco companies looked at this problem and they viewed it as a problem because although they were selling something that was killing people, they were making a lot of money and they wished to continue selling it. And they recognized pretty quickly that they couldn't push back factually because the facts were pretty clearly that smoking was killing people. So instead they did a brilliant thing, which was they hired a marketing group to just confuse the situation. Well, we don't actually know that it's smoking that's causing lung cancer. It could be something else. So we need more research, we need more time. And in the meantime, people are dying by the millions. So it was a very um, disturbing thing that happened, but it makes perfect sense in the context of capitalism. If you can suppress an obvious truth, you can continue to make money, and that's the point of capitalism, isn't it? So eventually, cooler heads prevailed. Science kind of made clear that smoking was bad for people and that cigarettes were terribly addictive. And now, we've gone from 80% of America smoking to about 18% of America smoking. So we've made immense inroads, but it's taken 70 years and huge amounts of public health money to try and get the message out that smoking is bad for people.
One of the things that I try to stress when I'm doing workstation consultations is that people shouldn't take medical advice from the furniture salesman. And one of the things that I find very disturbing about this ergonomics industry is that it wasn't, to my knowledge, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it's not a science. And I don't believe that any doctors were involved in setting up these standards that everybody is looking at for guidance. They're saying, oh, I'm ergonomic, I'm sitting 90, 90, 90.
Right.
That
No,
refers.
you could ask the question, where do doctors get their opinions about chairs? And the answer is where everybody else does. They don't teach classes in this stuff in medical school. It just never came up, right? It's not, it just never came up. So absent any real, scientific medical input, people start giving themselves certification and appointing themselves to committees, and pretty soon they've written standards based on, well, whatever the committee decided. And if you look under the covers of these manuals that explain where these standards for office chairs come from, they were largely written by people who come from the industry that is making office chairs. So it's a self-referential system. We're making great chairs because this is the kind of chair we make. There's no real research there. It turns out you can get a PhD in ergonomics, but it's a funny thing. They don't really tell you about sitting there either. You study some biochemistry and some biomechanics and some biostatistics, but the business of actually understanding how people best should be sitting is still kind of up for grabs. The people who seem to have the clearest idea are really the anthropologists and epidemiologists who look to see what the effect of sitting is on actual populations of human beings. And it turns out it's catastrophic. We sit a lot, and we have, and 80% of Americans have back pain at some point in their lives. And if you fractionate people by how much time they spend sitting, the more time you spend sitting, the sooner you die. And the group with the highest amount of sitting loses 2 years off of their average lifespan. So how does that happen? Well, people are inactive when they're sitting. Their lipoprotein lipase goes down. Their bad cholesterol goes up. Their good cholesterol goes down. Their insulin goes up. They get type 2 diabetes. They become overweight, and they start having heart attacks. So and actually, when it's been studied, certain cancers, certain malignancies are more common in people who sit a lot. So we're pretty clear from the epidemiology, and none of this stuff is a secret. I mean, it's right there at the National Library of Medicine. You can log on and read the abstracts for free. It's your tax dollars at work. So the idea that Big Chair is unaware of this, I don't think so. I'm pretty sure they're aware, but as Upton Sinclair said, it is very hard to convince somebody of a fact when their paycheck depends upon not understanding that fact. And I think that's pretty much what's going on with big tobacco back in the 50s and with Big Chair now.
Yes, and when it comes to repetitive strain injuries, chairs are a huge culprit because of the fact that it's really difficult to use your upper extremity well when you're seated. Just the position of pronation, and combine that with a bent elbow, and you've just violated all these curves where the muscle is naturally long and strong and put it in a position of failure.
Right.
So
And if you do this to tens of millions of people, you create an immense amount of unhappiness and physical damage that may not even be correctable given optimal therapy. So these are huge problems, and it costs a lot of money. Um, just back pain, comes on for $100 billion a year in the United States. That's up there with cancer and heart disease. How is that even possible? Well, missed work, time going to a doctor, paying the doctor, getting your back operated on, a back surgery gone bad, repeat back. I mean, the list of misery and unhappiness goes on and on. So, by having willfully ignored the things that might make sitting safer for people, we've created a great deal of unhappiness. We know that cars were quite dangerous in the 30s and 40s. We were killing a lot of people. And then the public health people got involved and said, you can't talk people into driving better. That's not going to happen. What you have to do is you have to make safer roads and you have to make safer cars. And then people will be safer regardless of what choices they make in the moment. So, if you just have a painted line down the middle of the road, cars can hit each other head on and it doesn't go well. But if you have a physical barrier so a divided highway, it's much safer for everybody because now you can't hit another car head on. Similarly, if you have airbags, you don't have to make a decision. It's there if you need it. Requiring seat belts was huge. And the car industry pushed back against that for God knows what reason. It just makes no sense, really. There's just such inertia in such systems, I guess.
and that leads me to another thing I'd like to talk about with you, which is you have a small company that made this active chair, and you said you were invited by TED to donate some chairs.
We were thrilled because I gave a TED talk a couple of years ago, so I'm all in on the TED project. I love TED talks. I love the TED concept. Ideas worth spreading. It's a great thing. So we were thrilled when the TED guys have, like, once a year they have a really big shindig. This year it was going to be in Malibu, California, and it goes on for 2 days, and it's really for their high rollers. It's $25,000 admission. So it's not like for normal people, but it's a way for people to contribute to the TED project and be recognized by going to this special event. So anyway, they pass out bling for these people who come to this high dollar TED event, and we were approached. Could we provide some of our cool chairs that are so radically different from customary chairs? And we said, yeah, no, that'd be great. We'd love to kind of get out and mix it up with people who are really at the cutting edge of new ideas and new technologies. And the person we were talking to from TED said, oh yeah, I just have to check one thing. And 2 days later, she called us and said, never mind. It turns out TED has a previous arrangement with Steelcase, and Steelcase said no, nothing doing. So we were sort of, I don't know, thrilled that we were considered a threat by a $4 billion company, but also a little miffed that we wanted to get some of our chairs out into the world so people could give us opinions about them and so on. So anyway, it's an interesting story of David and Goliath, and so far David isn't doing so well.
No, but I feel the same way. I mean, I'm the David, and the ergonomics industry is the Goliath, and I keep putting stuff out there, hoping that people will listen and take heed. And I keep bringing experts like you on the show to talk about what really happens and why, in scientific medical terms, why sitting is not a good idea with all these external supports.
Right. No, and if you talk to really thoughtful people inside of the chair industry, and I met a guy who was actually on the design team for the Herman Miller Aeron chair, which is like the biggest selling office chair in the history of office chairs. They've sold over 8 million of them. And I gave him my perspective as a doctor and a biostatistician and epidemiologist about just the mischief that office chairs were causing. And he was a thoughtful guy who'd spent his life inside of the chair industry and was really sort of confused by it all. But he could feel, sitting on one of our chairs, that it was like radically different and interesting. So we swapped email addresses, and he got back to me about a week later, and he said in his email, he said, "I feel terrible. I've spent my whole life trying to make chairs so comfortable no one would want to get up. And now I find that sitting still, slumped all day in front of a computer is terrible for people's posture, creates back pain, and takes years off their life." And then he goes on to say, "But what do you want me to do? We've convinced people they cannot sit in a chair that doesn't have lumbar support. And so our industry now cannot sell a chair unless it has lumbar support." So the whole industry is just trapped in its legacy of a false narrative. You have to be supported with a backrest and a headrest and a footrest and armrests and leg rests and lumbar support, or you just can't get through the day. That's just not true. For most of human history, we didn't have any of that stuff, and somehow people got through the day. So they're trapped in their false narrative, and they don't have a way out. And when somebody shows up with a different narrative, their impulse is just to crush it. And so how interesting is that?
I think it's very interesting. And I'd also like you to address this idea of another false narrative, I guess might be a way to phrase it, but they sound very scientific. I mean, even the word ergonomist sounds official. It sounds like you had to have a degree. It sounds like you have to know something.
Oh, and there are people with PhDs in ergonomics. So, it's a thing. It's not like just totally made up.
I mean, you can talk to the joke in the RSI community. You want to hear the joke? It's
Okay.
that ergonomics shifts the injury around to another place. It's actually, I mean, people get more than one injury. Usually they have about a couple of dozen by the time they're through because of the compensatory and substitution injuries they get from these ergonomic adjustments, or just trying to avoid the pain from one area and then they overuse another. So can you talk a little bit about that, Dr. Osler, for us?
So it's a disturbing thing, really. That we say science as though it were a monolith, but it isn't really monolithic. Science is a method. And the thing that distinguishes science from every other human pursuit is that scientists believe that every proposition is falsifiable. Anything that you say is only provisionally true, and if you're lucky, will be displaced by a greater truth. So Galileo had an idea about how things worked, and Newton came along and said, no, it works like this. And then Einstein came along and said, no, Newton was close, but really it works like this. And now people are working on the unified. Science it doesn't have an end, because it's not a final product. It's a method. And the method is to constantly question what it is that you think you know, and constantly be trying to disprove what it is that you think you know. We don't really see this very much in the ergonomics community. They pretty much have a set of standards that didn't really come from any serious statistical analysis. It's just a group of people sat down and decided that this would be what an office chair should be, based on the way office chairs have always been. But the way office chairs have always been hasn't been very successful. 80% of Americans have back pain. New chairs are sold every year, but the design hasn't really changed. So the fact that nothing is changing makes you think that there's not much science going on, because science is the whole project, is to try new things to find what might work better. Um, so, um, and it's, I've been to ergonomic conferences and listened to academics, give their talks, and they're pretty sterile. The math isn't well done, the statistical modeling isn't very sophisticated, and there's not much there. So, but it's a hard project. To be fair, it's a lot easier to decide if a vaccine works or not than it is to decide if a chair is successful, because it's complicated.
There's another aspect about ergonomics that I find unsettling. And that is, I at one point worked for a company and they would send me out to do workstation analyses according to their charts. I took the measurements their way. And I remember doing a consultation with one woman and she was almost in tears. She's having so much pain. There had been layoffs and she was doing 3 people's work. She was working on weekends and she was in searing, agonizing pain because she was just overworking. And no amount of ergonomics is going to solve the internal physical problem. For that, you need, first of all, rest, and then physical therapy for months and months, if not years, in order to regain some function. So this woman was telling me this story, and I took notes and I wrote to the company saying, she's in agonizing pain because she's doing 3 people's work from this layoff, and and the response that I got from this company was, this is an HR problem. So they were basically passing the buck to HR, that this woman, ergonomics was not going to help her pain. It wasn't really going to solve her problem. Even if we got all the angles right and got her more comfortable, she had done some serious damage to her upper extremity. And I remember thinking at the time of how convenient. You're just going to say it's an HR problem. It's not an ergonomic problem. And probably, I'm guessing, judging on years and years of experience here, she probably got fired or quit because she physically couldn't do her job. And this happens to a lot of people. They literally cannot hold their hands to the keyboard. They cannot work in that setting anymore. It just is impossible. Their hands rebel and they just can't. Or they get fired because they're not being as productive as they once were. But it seems insidious to me that this is the state of affairs, and yet ergonomics still has such a sort of stranglehold in this area. I mean, the employers say, well, we gave you ergonomics, what more do you want? But ergonomics is not going to solve that physical problem.
Well, and if ergonomics were the answer, how come 80% of America still has back pain? I mean, it's a self-evident failure. What's to be done? Well, for sure, sitting less would be a good idea. But we're not likely to get away from sitting altogether. So sitting better would be an important piece of the puzzle. And the epidemiologists have taught us quite a lot. You just need exercise snacks. A couple minutes of walking around every half hour changes your biochemistry in a way that's measurable and beneficial. It's hard to get people to do that because now they have to remember to set a timer and this and that and the other thing. So, our approach has been to say, well, let's make a chair that keeps people in basically constant motion as though they were walking. And now there's no timers and it's your own damn fault you didn't get up every 30 minutes. The idea of blaming the patient, that's a pretty tawdry approach to taking care of people.
Thank you for saying that. Yes, somebody has to stick up for the people who are working in these inappropriate settings because you really don't have much choice. Even the UPS person has to have a computer. I mean, everything is computerized nowadays.
But at least the UPS person gets to jump up and drive the truck for a while and run around and do something else. The people that I worry most about are the people who are like sitting at desks and don't have an excuse to get up and do something else. And
yeah, and they really don't want you to get up.
That's a lot of people. And so, you know, the business of making a chair that keeps people moving seemed to me like a way forward that would be helpful to basically anybody, but very helpful to a lot of people.
Well, I want to thank you for being an advocate for active sitting, for enlightening us about this issue and taking such a progressive stand. I mean, somebody has to move this field forward, and I feel very happy that, you know, there's a small collection of people, most of whom wind up on my show one way or the other.
I'm hoping we get some hate mail from Big Chair, you know, then we'll know we're making progress.
Yes, those dislikes can count. Is there anything else you want to talk about in terms of this issue that I haven't asked?
You know, it's the analogy to big tobacco was quite strict, you know, because in the 50s, everybody smoked. It was felt to be normal. You know, it was a big lift to convince people that smoking is not normal. You know, humans aren't supposed to be smoking. It's not good for them. And fast forward to, you know, 2021, and everybody is sitting in an office chair. How could that be bad for you? It's normal, right? How else would it be? Well, you know, that's what they said about smoking. And it really took a breakthrough in imagination to be able to imagine that smoking was not a good idea. And until that breakthrough, nothing could happen. And so we're struggling now with the breakthrough idea that, you know, the office chair that you've been given is not your friend.
You know, speaking of smoking, I wrote a paper years ago about the correlation between smoking and RSI. And I took it from a slightly different viewpoint, which was mainly that one cigarette won't kill you. It's the cigarettes, it's the packs, it's the day in, the day out. And
right. Native Americans did not have a problem with tobacco. What happened was we invented machines that could make cigarettes by the billions, and suddenly people could chain smoke. And that was the catastrophe. You know, smoking your pipe once a month at some ceremony is fine. But as soon as you make cigarettes available constantly, you have created an immense problem. Similarly, you know, sitting down any old way for a little while, you're going to be okay. But if you require people to sit 8 or 10 hours a day in an office chair, you must take responsibility for what happens next, and it's not pretty.
Yes, I couldn't agree with you more. We agree.
Again.
So thank you for enlightening us, Dr. Osler. You're welcome back anytime you want to talk to us more about the progress or lack thereof, or let's make a deal. If you get some hate mail,
I'll let you
come
know.
back. Yeah, I'll read it on the channel. That would be great.
As FDR said, I welcome their hate.
All right. So thank you very much.
Sure.